Tears of the Kingdom producer Eiji Aonuma and director Hidemaro Fujibayashi has been doing the rounds recently before the Game Awards, talking about Tears of the Kingdom and also the implications for the future of the Zelda franchise. Well, today I'm going to have a look at how much the developers consider the timeline when making Zelda games, if we're going to see Tears of the Kingdom DLC, if Zelda is going to be playable in the future, and are Link and Zelda a couple? Well, without further delay, let's dive right into these interviews. So first of all, we're going to have a look at the Game Informer interview with Brian Shea. And what I've done is put a link down to that interview down below, so if you want to check out the full interview, definitely go over there to Game Informer and check out Brian's work. He does a really good podcast as well called All Things Nintendo that releases every week, and I would definitely recommend going over to Game Informer and checking out Brian's work. Well, Brian said, earlier this year you confirmed that there won't be any DLC for Tears of the Kingdom because you already accomplished everything you want to accomplish in the game. Have you ruled out another direct sequel? Well, Eiji Aonuma says, well, that would be a sequel to a sequel, which is getting a little bit wild when you think about it. But as I've mentioned previously, with Tears of the Kingdom, we were seeking to build on top of the world we created with Breath of the Wild and really exhaust the possibilities of what we could put into that world. I think it is, to use a term, an hypothesis or the final form of that version of The Legend of Zelda. And in that regard, I don't think we're going to be making a direct sequel to a world such as that we have created. Well, Brian followed up with, when you're developing a new Zelda title, obviously your primary focus is on core gameplay, but the timeline placement discussion has become more important and prevalent among fans of the series. How much consideration and importance does the development team put into those discussions? Well, Fujibayashi says, as you mentioned, we realise that fans have a great time theorising and enjoying thinking about where things fit on the timeline. You know, that is something that the development team recognises and it considers, but to an extent. And I say to an extent because if we get too into the weeds or too into the detail of that placement, it results in a kind of restraint for our creativity. And the process of creating new ideas becomes restricted because we're so tied up in trying to make things fit into a very specific spot in the timeline. We do consider it, but not to an extent where we feel that our development process feels restricted or constrained. And Eiji Aonuma followed up with another point kind of related to this, is we've been able to realise a more fully real working world because of technology, and you're also able to fine-tune all the details of that world. But we don't always want to do that just because we can. Instead, as people play the game, we want to be able to give them the ability to exist in that world, and a world where they can interpret in their own way. And so, that is also something that we'll really keep in mind as we continue to develop games. Next question, so have you heard the theory that some of the scenes in Tears of the Kingdom are perhaps loose retellings of events in Ocarina of Time? Aonuma says, oh no, I'm hearing that one for the first time. Well, we've got Rauru, there's the imprisoning war, and there's some scenes in Tears of the Kingdom that resemble scenes in Ocarina of Time, particularly in the flashbacks. For example, you've got that scene where Ganondorf is kneeling before the King of Hyrule before he betrays him. Well, Fujibayashi says, we understand that fans have theories, and it's a fun thing to do for fans. We also think about all kinds of theories fans may come up with given what we create. It's not like we're trying to plan ahead for those theories, but in the series there's this idea of reincarnation in that Zelda and Link, they appear in different titles. They're not the same person per se, but there's this sort of fundamental soul that carries on. Because of that, certain scenes may turn out similar. Like you were saying, the antagonist kneeling before the king, those scenes might turn out because they're sort of like glimpses or representations of the soul of the series. Now, for people to kind of pick up on that and see that is something we really enjoy. It also kind of helps create the myth of the Legend of Zelda. Does Hyrule that we saw in the flashback scene in Tears of the Kingdom predate Skyward Sword, or does it come after the other games in the timeline? Well, Fujibayashi says, obviously there's something a little bit clearer in our minds, but of course it could be that we're wrong as well. I kind of want to pose the idea, like in real life history, you define the artifacts by the data that you currently have. So within what we have, there might be a correct answer, but it could be different. So I guess my answer would be that it could be both. Both could be correct. And Aonuma says, I mean, The Legend of Zelda is a series of games that focus on the puzzle solving, so this is just another sort of puzzle that the users will have to see if they can solve and think about. Was a really interesting question here from Brian as for the final question. So he says, thank you both so much for your time. And I've heard somehow questions about the games can inspire them to be made. So I selfishly want to ask you about a modern Ocarina of Time remake. I've got a feeling that I know the answer I'm going to get. And apparently, Eiji Aonuma laughs and he says, no comment. So that is really, really intriguing stuff. Well, next up, I want to move over to Kat Bailey's IGN interview with Eiji Aonuma and Hidemaro Fujibayashi. This one is another fantastic interview, and we're going to kick off with a question. So, Zelda's role in Tears of the Kingdom, and also, what is the opportunity for that to grow in the future? Well, yes, it's interesting when you think about the name of the series, The Legend of Zelda, but Link is always the main character. Aonuma admitted when thinking about the potential for Zelda to be playable in the future. And Link has been the main character, Zelda's always been involved, and they have a relationship and their own rules in each game. But it is true that I think there's always room for thinking about this type of thing, and also Zelda's role. And there may be some sort of possibility for something like that in the future. Aonuma, who was speaking through a translator, then interjected in English, and he simply said, maybe, maybe, maybe. Well, then they moved on to Zelda's more developed role in Tears of the Kingdom, and also her place in Link retrieving the Master Sword in the game. So this story has a great time paradox as a theme that goes through it, Fujibayashi said. And so we were thinking, okay, well, how can we use the Master Sword when we've got that theme as a background and get the Master Sword into Link's hands once he no longer has it? And I remember that we at some point stumbled onto the dragon being a way that we can deliver the Master Sword to Link in a kind of grand fashion. I think there's always been room for thinking about this type of thing and Zelda's role. There may be some sort of possibility for something like that in the future. The remarkable part of this twist is that it can be discovered at any number of points throughout the story. Players who decide to uncover all the memories scattered throughout the world will eventually uncover the truth, but it's also possible for an enterprising explorer to make their way to a transformed Zelda relatively early on and discover the Master Sword for themselves, even if they can't retrieve it right away. This form of non-linear storytelling requires an intricate layer of design work, but if that proved to be stressful to the Tears of the Kingdom development team, well, they are definitely not admitting it. We built the game so it's an enjoyable experience for the player, and we certainly spent a long time discussing with some of the main contributors to the game, and really thinking about how we would build the game such that if anyone were to, say, discover the dragon without seeing anything else, that could maybe perhaps conceal it a little bit more, maybe make it a little bit more mysterious, Fujibayashi says. There's a lot of hard work in figuring out how to accomplish all of this. This is all tied to the idea that there's a certain sense of accomplishment and joy when you're working hard towards something and you unravel this deep mystery. We want the player to be able to enjoy this and for us to be able to enjoy that as well. So in a sense, I would certainly say it is a lot of work. It's certainly a lot of hard work, but it wasn't stressful. Well, finally, they alluded to the question in Are Link and Zelda a couple? And Eiji Aonuma says, I'm going to leave it open to everyone's imagination, whether Link and Zelda are in a relationship or not. I don't think that Zelda is the type of game where the development team says, this is what Zelda is, this is what the story is, and this is what the game is. Everything the development team wants to convey has already been placed into the game, and the rest is up to the player's imagination and their reflection on how they feel or what they've experienced in the game. Well, some really interesting stuff there from Eiji Aonuma and Hidemaro Fujibayashi. And thank you once again to the team over at Game Informer, Brian Shea in particular, and also Kat Bailey at IGN for those fantastic interviews. And it's always really, really good to hear more about the behind-the-scenes thinking for the development of a Zelda game, and we've definitely got loads of press with Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild. It's been great to hear what Aonuma and Fujibayashi have been saying, and I hope you enjoyed these snippets of the interviews as well. Well, that is it today for the highlights of the Game Informer and the IGN interviews with the producer and the director of Tears of the Kingdom. And as always, thank you so much for watching or for listening. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button down below and also that like button. It would really help me out. Well, thanks again, and I will see you very soon.